Hello, and welcome to this virtual Harvard Radcliffe Institute program, Title IX at 50, Progress Made and Challenges Ahead for Women's Sports. I'm Rebecca Wasserman, Executive Director of Academic Ventures and Engagement at Radcliffe. As many of you know, today, June 23rd, 2022, is the 50th anniversary to the day of the passage of Title IX, the landmark federal legislation that prohibited sex discrimination in any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Our program will discuss the impact of the amendment's 37 transformational words on women's athletics, as well as what remains to be done to move us closer to equity in women's sports. Today's program will feature a stellar lineup of speakers, all former college athletes who have leveraged their athletic experiences into leadership roles in an array of professional fields, from coaching to filmmaking, journalism, and community and social impact work. As you'll hear, all are passionate about and deeply committed to issues of equity, opportunity, gender, and sports. I want to thank the Perrin, Moorhead, Grayson, and Bruns, Grayson Dean's Leadership Fund for Academic Ventures at Radcliffe, which is supporting this event. The kind generosity of these donors helps keep our programming free and open to the public. One quick logistical note, we encourage those watching on Zoom to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions at any time during the program. The speakers will address as many as they can in the time we have. You'll hear in just a moment from our moderator, Shira Springer, who will introduce the other speakers in more detail. Shira is a journalist and lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management. She was a cross-country track and field athlete at Harvard and has covered sports and its intersections with gender, race, business, politics, and culture for over 20 years. A former Boston Globe reporter, Shira was a member of the Globe staff that shared the paper's Pulitzer Prize for coverage of the Boston Marathon bombing. She's also written stories for the New York Times, ESPN.com, Neiman Reports, and produced audio features for NPR and WBUR, where she was awarded multiple national awards for her radio storytelling. She continues to write for the Sports Business Journal and many other national outlets while teaching leadership communication at Sloan. Again, thank you for joining us. I'll now turn the virtual floor over to our moderator, Shira Springer.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you to the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. Thank you to the panelists who I'll introduce in a moment. And most importantly, thank you to everyone in the audience who has joined us to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Title IX and discuss its impact. We'll be taking questions, as Becky mentioned, from the audience, so please submit your questions via the Q&A feature. After all, there's a lot to discuss and a lot of directions we can go in. It always amazes me that 37 words could have so much impact on the lives of women and most visibly on women's sports. And we certainly recognize that Title IX has affected more than women's access to athletics. But for the purposes of this discussion, and because we only have an hour together, we are going to focus on sports. With that in mind, two Title IX related statistics come up time and again and always strike me as capturing the range of the impact of Title IX. First, women made up 15% of college athletes in 1972. That's roughly 30,000 athletes. Now, 44% of college athletes are women. That's roughly 220,000 athletes. Second, among women who hold C-suite positions, 94% have played sports, according to a study by Ernst & Young. So it's undeniable that Title IX has changed lives and changed society. It's also undeniable that challenges remain and that some of the positive impacts from Title IX have been unevenly shared in terms of race, socioeconomic status, and our emerging understandings of gender. We'll dive into all of this with panelists who have played college sports and who have gone on to tremendously successful careers. And now on to those panelist intros. First, I want to introduce Tracy Green. She is the Sheila Kelly Palandjian head coach for Harvard women's tennis. She recently completed her 15th season with the Crimson. Under her guidance, the women's team has won 2 Ivy League titles. And for the 2021-2022 season, Tracy was named the Ragatz Family Harvard Women's Coach of Excellence for the exemplary leadership and mentorship she provided student athletes during the pandemic. Tracy played tennis as an undergraduate at the University of Florida. While there, she was part of Florida's 1998 national championship team. Also at Florida, she ranked as high as number 5 nationally in doubles and number 12 in singles. And very early in her tennis career, Arthur Ashe invited Tracy to his camps and clinics. Tracy also attended camps where none other than Billie Jean King gave her advice on her forehand. In a few moments, we'll talk about what it's like to learn from icons like Arthur Ashe and Billie Jean King, and what it was like for Tracy growing up with a mom who played and coached lacrosse before and after the passage of Title IX. And now on to Melissa Johnson, or MJ. Melissa is an Emmy-nominated and Academy Award shortlisted writer and filmmaker. She's also a Harvard Radcliffe alum who played for the women's basketball team and captained the team her senior year. Talking about her work, Melissa says she loves to tell stories about badass women. She directed a documentary entitled Life Size, Brittany Griner, that followed the basketball star's transition from college to professional basketball and playing in the WNBA and overseas in China. Her autobiographical animated film, Love in the Time of March Madness, describes her dating life as a 6'4" woman, and it was shortlisted for the 2016 Academy Awards. Her films have appeared on Showtime, ESPN, and MTV. Melissa has also written first-person essays for the New York Times, The Guardian, Salon, and Narratively. And now on to Becca Sawwasser. She is the Executive Vice President of Social Impact for the Red Sox and the Director of the Red Sox Foundation. In her role as Executive VP of Social Impact, Becca helps the Red Sox promote racial and social justice causes that reflect the organization's core values. She also develops initiatives that promote social justice, equity, and inclusion. As director of the Red Sox Foundation, she helps realize the foundation's vision, helping make a difference in the lives of children, families, veterans, and communities in need by providing them with health, educational, and recreational opportunities. And while an undergraduate at Brown University, she played soccer. Then she competed professionally for the Boston Breakers when they were part of the Women's United Soccer Association. So an incredibly accomplished group of panelists to dive into our discussion of Title IX. And I want to start with Becca. And this is a question though for all of the panelists, but starting with Becca, when you hear the words Title IX, what comes to mind? Because it can mean so many things to different things to different people. What does Title IX mean to you?
Sure. And first, thanks for having me this afternoon. Lovely to be here and very excited to talk about this important topic. So for me, Title IX brings me back to a memory and experience with my sister. My older sister was recruited to play lacrosse at UMass Amherst. A couple of years into playing there, the team was cut. She then sued under Title IX and the team was reinstated her senior year. And so for me, it was this, at the time I was in middle school. And so I didn't quite understand what Title IX was, but living through it with my family and my sister, for me, it sort of spoke to perseverance. It spoke to equality. It spoke to opportunity. And seeing my sister sort of go through an experience of having her dream come true with playing collegiate lacrosse to having it taken away, but then fighting to get it reinstated and winning, which as a sidebar launched her career as an attorney, is really something that was powerful for me because I saw what Title IX could do personally for an individual that was trying to pursue their dream. So it means something very special and something very intimate to me and my family.
Tracy, do you want to take it from there?
Sure. First, thank you, Shira, and thank you to Harvard Radcliffe Institute for having this. I feel honored to be on this panel right now. When I think of Title IX, I generally think of two words, pretty simple. I think of life and I think of opportunity. I mean, when I say life, because for me, sports are my life. Even at a young age, going to gym class, I felt alive, whether I could run around, do whatever I wanted to do. So I grew up kind of knowing that and feeling that. It could be recess time. Now I could go play with my friends. I could play with the boys if I wanted to. So having that opportunity meant a lot to me. And the other side of it, opportunity, being able to be recruited in a sport. being able to choose which sports I wanted to play. And obviously I ended up playing tennis. And without that opportunity laid down by those before me, there's no way I could be where I am today. So I'm truly, truly grateful for Title IX.
And MJ?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this important conversation. And when I think about Title IX, what comes to mind is I belong here. And what I mean by that is, I know you can't tell because we're on Zoom, but I'm super tall. I'm 6'4", and I was 6'4" in 8th grade. So like picture in your mind an 8th grader that you know, and then imagine like a string bean with perm, and that was me, you know? And I felt truly like this sport just legitimized my body, my way of moving through the world. And so often, I don't need to tell any woman on this call, you already know, we are judged by the way we look, a standard of attractiveness in a society that can be very patriarchal, rules that we did not make up. And sports really afforded for me a chance to understand my body a different way, which is as an instrument to be powerful and to connect. And I can't overstate how much that changed my life. I can't imagine who I'd be or where I'd be without this sport. And I really owe it to the women that came before me and to Title IX.
So it's so interesting. I'm hearing you talk about the way it's changed your perspective on your life and sort of the possibilities you have in life. And I'm curious how your experience, particularly in sports, particularly in college, shaped the way you have approached your careers. And sort of whether it gave you confidence, it gave you resiliency, what were the lessons that you took out of your participation in college sports? And I think I'll kick this off with Tracy, because, you know, I can't even imagine playing tennis at the University of Florida. It must have been incredibly intense and a lot of pressure as well.
Oh yes. But as Billie Jean King says, pressure is a privilege, right? Right, Shira? And that's the way it was. We treated it as a privilege. And you kind of alluded there also, growing up, my mother was a coach of lacrosse, which is kind of unheard of at her time. So I kind of felt in a strange way I was following in her footsteps, even though I played tennis and her sport was lacrosse. So going to University of Florida was amazing. We had amazing opportunities there, amazing funding. We felt supported, we felt included, and we felt like we belonged, as MJ just mentioned. Belonging is a huge, huge word that so many people miss out on when they even have funding. They still don't feel included all the way. And at Florida, we felt that way. We got to come together and compete. One of the biggest lessons I learned on a team is how to be a team. And so hard in a sport like tennis, when you're competing for yourself all the time. I still wished I saw more people who looked like me in the sport, at that time, even right now. That was one of the things I did miss out on. But the biggest thing that I'm so grateful for that I'm seeing more and more of at all schools is the essence of belonging, which MJ just mentioned.
If there are other panelists who want to comment on sort of how it impacted their careers, how their college sports experience impacted their careers or their career ambition.
Sure, I feel like Tracy and I are just riffing off one another back and right, left and right, but I can remember when I lived in Los Angeles. When I came to Los Angeles years ago, early in my career, I had a huge meeting, like the most intimidating meeting of my life. And I go up, I'm in Hollywood, and I go up to this penthouse suite, this conference room, and I'm the first one there because I'm really nervous and I want to be early. And I'm there to pitch. I'm there to pitch a big idea to someone that I've only read about as like a luminary in the industry. And it's like, I'm talking like, you can see the Hollywood sign in one direction and the ocean. This was like the most impressive, intimidating room I think I've ever been in. And I don't even know where it came from, somewhere in me, but I just sitting there and like, I gotta, get my game face on. And the words that came up were I belong here. I belong here. This room is for me. I belong here. And looking back on it, I was like, that's just totally what I learned from my sports experience. Also, Kathy Delaney Smith, my basketball coach at Harvard, she's famous for act as if, fake it till you make it. Shout out Kathy. That kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to, I want to talk more about Kathy Delaney Smith and Arthur Ashe and Billie Jean King and mentors and the value of mentorship a little bit later on in this discussion. I'm just curious, there was a recent Pew Research Center poll that came out, and in it, 29% of men said that they think Title IX has not gone far enough, but nearly half of the women surveyed thought that Title IX has not gone far enough. And I know I'm cheating here a bit, but I know from our pre-panel discussions that collectively as a group, we feel there is some distance to go with Title IX. So I'm curious, and I'll turn to Becca for this one. Where would you like, one area or two areas where you think Title IX can go farther and do more and should do more?
For sure. Yeah, I think there's an interesting intersection between the disparity between growth of women's sports in general, but also women of color when we think about Title IX. And soccer was a huge, one of the sports that benefited the most from Title IX. I was just actually doing some research before this and found that at the high school level, it saw the biggest increase of participation since Title IX soccer did, which is great. But that was mostly for young white girls and not young girls of color. And so I think where we need to do better is making sure that there are opportunities for young girls of color in communities of color to participate in sports. Again, sidebar, one of the reasons why I do the work that I do now, right? And why I have worked at sports organizations like the Boston Red Sox and the Boston Celtics, running both of their foundations, to make sure that I could be intentional about creating interventions and opportunities and programs that are specific to young girls in communities of color to be able to participate at the same level with the same resources as their male counterparts.
And I will admit, I did some research, and Tracy, I hope you don't mind if I share my little discovery earlier today, but I was doing some research on exactly this issue, right? Which is the fact that what often doesn't get talked about enough is that the legislation has benefited white women, whether that's athletes or administrators or coaches, far more than it has benefited women of color. And there needs to be a closing of that gap. And in my research, I came across a certain lacrosse coach who was speaking out about this and the need to change the narrative. And so I'm wondering the influence of your mother, Tracy, and her activism in this space, but also what you think and what you've learned from her about what can and should be done to close the gap.
Sure. And first, I just want to, chime in on what Becca just said, in terms of women of color, not being addressed and also having the numbers needing to be raised, right? As you just said, access, so critical, right? And that's what my mother always advocated. I kind of grew up with a mom who was a little bit of an activist type of mom. So, all these issues were at the forefront of my mind at a young age. I knew what tenure was when I was like 5, which is super weird. But anyway, I truly believe access is the key, right? So that's one step where we can go with Title IX, improving it for everyone. That's how I got my start. She was actually running a summer camp. It was called the NYSP Summer Camp, the National Youth Sports Program, and it was run by the NCAA. And it was made so colleges could reach out to the local communities. And so I was at Temple University in Philadelphia. And because she was running, I just tagged along. And I was, a little younger than the right age, but I went to the camp anyway because she was running. And I learned all these sports and all these non-traditional sports for African Americans, for Black folks. And so there I learned lacrosse. She already coached lacrosse, so I kind of knew that sport already. But I learned, a whole host of sports that I probably wouldn't have gotten into or been interested in. So that access, that beginning touch is super important. That exposure is super important. So if we can continue that, we're going to be on the right path. But for me, growing up with a mom like that was amazing. She was very good at her craft. She won 3 national championships at that time, right? She also was a professor. So I grew up going into huddles and, being there right there with the team and just feeling that was my life. So when I say sports is my life, I truly mean that.
I want to just stick a little bit with this notion of access and gaps in the sense that one of the other places we see gaps, and I think you're probably very familiar with this, Tracy, is in the coaching ranks, right? So 1972, I believe the statistic is, and I have it here, female colleges, they were represent 90%, of women's teams, the coaches were 90% female. And then now we're hovering around 40% today in terms of women coaching at the college level. And there's a scarcity of women in leadership when it comes to athletic directors as well. And I'm curious, is this a question of access as well? Tracy, I know you may have some thoughts, but if others have some thoughts on that as well, Tracy, you can tip it off, but I see you nodding your head.
Sure. I'm nodding my head. And first of all, I'm very fortunate. Our athletic director here is Erin McDermott, and she's a woman. She's the first woman AD I've had in general. And it's amazing to see her at Harvard. She's the first woman AD at Harvard. So if she's watching, go Erin, we're rooting for you. So that's amazing. So having, because every day, first of all, seeing that person, because right, seeing is believing. So other folks coming along that path who want to be ADs, or maybe they don't even know they want to be ADs yet, seeing that person in that role is critical. People seeing me in my role is critical. Billie Jean King talks about that all the time, right? And not seeing enough role models. So having those role models is key. Having women elevated in situations so they can get those positions is crucial. And then having folks in those leadership and powerful decision-making positions to make the right call and take chances on folks. To me, that's what it takes. We're getting closer, but obviously we haven't done enough. And I'm really hoping that people can get with it, and this anniversary will help spark some of that change.
Is there any? It's hard on Zoom, but does anyone else have any thoughts about the importance of access, the importance of seeing people in leadership positions? I know you're very lucky, MJ, out in LA to have Angel City in the National Women's Soccer League, which I believe 30 out of the 40 owner investors there are women. So tremendous representation. And I'm curious what a difference that has made. I know you've talked about that before.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time in Los Angeles, and the conversation with Angel City and what they're doing, and really getting women in the control room on the business side of this venture and making it happen. I just read there's a great article in Fast Company about the women behind it. And, until we get women of color in the control room, at the reins, controlling the purse strings, we're not going to achieve real and lasting change. It is just fundamentally essential, full stop. That's how it works. So, and I totally agree with everything that Tracy just said as well, in terms of the coaching perspective. I've noticed that a lot too, just as a player, and for a very brief time as a high school basketball coach. Why aren't there more women, and why aren't there more women of color in these positions?
Yeah, I would only add that I think we also need to rethink the infrastructure and the structure. It's not built to support women. And a good example of that is, if a woman and a man enter the system at the same time, coaching, say, a woman might step out to have a family. She might be pushed out to have a family. Same thing as a player, right? I had so many teammates that had to stop playing and they weren't welcome back after they had their children. We need to figure out a way to make sure the system supports women that might step out to have a family, or whereas a man's going to stay in and be able to accelerate his career if and when a woman steps out. And so the structure completely needs to be rethought from an equity lens to make sure that it is supporting the goals and dreams and hopes of women and men, but particularly women, like I said, that might want to step out to have a family.
I think that ties in nicely to the first audience question I'm going to take, because a member of the audience asked, what are the threats to Title IX going forward? And I think, as you were saying, Becca, there are some systemic issues here and some cultural bias that we simply haven't overcome. And those are creating barriers. So I don't know if Becca, you want to address the threats, or I see you, Tracy, nodding. So is there somebody who wants to jump in? I see you open. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I will just say that I think, again, as we think about sort of sports nationally and what is on what the media covers and what we think of as like, our national sports, it's all male focused. It's all about like strength and brute power and physicality and this like fixation on power and violence and strength. And that's not through the lens of women's sport, in my opinion. And I think until we shift sort of the fixation on that aspect of what is sports, we're going to be on different playing fields. The national conversation and rhetoric is all going to be about just pure brute strength and not on, the other sort of delicacies that are women in women's sport. And so I think we've also got to just shift the lens of what we think of as like the most popular, most attractive sports in this country, which football, NFL is a huge, driver of national coverage and what, supposedly our country likes to see. But the whole lens is just male focused, and we've got to reshape that.
Mm-hmm. So change the narrative. And that's sort of your department, MJ, in terms of the stories we tell around athletes and athletics. And I know you feel strongly, as I think part of it is being a 6'4" woman, about the bodies that we show, right? The way in which we represent female athletes. There's sometimes not a lot of diversity there. We have a type, and anything outside that range doesn't get attention or doesn't get the proper respect. And I'm curious,
Absolutely.
As a storyteller, how you look at that.
Absolutely. In reality, female athletes come in every shape and size and height and weight and color and persuasion. Like there's, you name the sport, like I would be a terrible gymnast, at 6'4", every sport lends itself to different body types, but what you tend to see in films and television and stories and imagery, marketing, advertising about athletes is a very narrow band of what a female athlete looks like. And it's time for that to change. What I do see progress in is, compared to 10 years ago, I could name 5 shows right now that have female athletes as characters. However, they don't look like any, and I particularly focus on basketball because that was my sport. Like these women, they do not look like the women that I played basketball with growing up in high school and college. Like, where are the muscle butts? Show me the muscle butts. I actually think the best representation I've seen recently of a different body type, an athletic female body type, is in Encanto with Luisa, the sister, Surface Pressure. And what I heard, Disney made that film. It's a beautiful film, but it was the women at Disney that were like, you got to keep this, because there was talk of, okay, maybe she'd be more traditional, or all the fans are going to love the very beautiful model, flower sister, but it's Luisa that they were just starving for. They want this. So I want to see athletes depicted in film and television that show that diversity of what it means to be an athlete, that have muscles, that break outside the mold, the very rigid mold that I'm familiar with in Hollywood of casting agents and what an actor is supposed to be. And how do you do that? How do you push that forward? I'm writing a series right now of, it's just between us on this Zoom, called Lady Kings. It's like the sexy big sister to Friday Night Lights, set in big time Division I women's basketball. And I'm baking it into the script, the body types, what these different women look like. It is non-negotiable from the words on the page. And that's something I'm really excited to push and fight for. And I really believe it's something that the world wants to see. We just got to get it out there more and prove to the industry that the audience really is there for it.
I will add how I was so disappointed at Bend It Like Beckham. I don't know if you guys remember that movie, but every soccer teammate of mine was like, really? These are the people that were cast as athletes and like soccer players? It was so far from the reality of like, even the shots at the feet with the dribbling, it was awful. I was like, at least get real players to do those like B-roll shots. Come on.
I couldn't agree more. Exactly. Get the diverse body types, and actually don't tell me in a story and film and television that oh, she's a swimmer, she's a soccer player, she's a basketball player, but you never see her do the activity. Just somehow happens magically off screen. It's like, no, like let's get her doing it.
Right.
So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
Just curious, at the college level, Tracy, when it comes to media and media representation, we're talking, Becca was mentioning how there is a lack of coverage. The number that's always the statistic is that women's sports in the US receive only 4% of overall media coverage. So, Title IX can give you opportunity, but it can't force media to cover you. And I'm wondering about the impact on the athletes that you coach. The frustrations, because I think it's not only media coverage. When we talk about media and representation, it's also marketing. It's also their visibility. It's also them being pushed out and promoted. And how your athletes feel about it, how you feel about perhaps unequal coverage.
Well, let me say this: Gen Z is something else. Okay, so when something's going on, they will let you know, right? When something's a little bit off or a little bit shaky, they will let you know. So I have complete confidence in this generation that's coming up. If the coverage is a little bit off, like you mentioned, Shira, this group, I know my team will write to me to send us, Coach, can you please forward this email to so and so and so? They'll let me know right away. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of them for that. They stand up for themselves. They're outspoken, and I love it. And they're women, young women doing this. So I feel really confident about the future. And as far as representation goes, and the visuals that Melissa just mentioned, we're not there yet. They feel that as well. I hear it all the time. Coach, why is this person on this? Why is this person on that? But I think we're getting there. We need more women in those roles. I think more women, and then we'll have less of that. But definitely more work needs to be done for sure.
So you mentioned Gen Z, and I don't think you can mention Gen Z without thinking about social media and the way in which women athletes, women's sports has harnessed social media as a platform for activism, and as I think your players are doing, sort of to say, hey, this isn't right. We need this, we need that. And we all probably remember Sedona Prince and her TikTok video last year pointing out the inequality of the weight rooms at the NCAA basketball tournament. So I'm curious to find out, and maybe we'll start here with Melissa, because it is a college basketball topic, but the power of social media and how that is transforming women's sports as well. It's not just Title IX pushing things along, but there are other avenues now for athletes to use, particularly when things aren't fair.
It is massive. Everyone has a microphone now, and Sedona Prince's impact, if you haven't seen this, audience, just Google it, look it up. It's so stark. I couldn't believe it. You asked a moment ago, Shira, like, well, what are the gaps that still exist? I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it in that video, how stark the contrast was. Like, now still, really, like maybe 20 years ago, but you got to be kidding me. So I think the power to force transparency and to show people what's really going on can't be understated. And I think that this generation coming up, like Tracy just said, is a very active generation, is a very progressive generation, and they're not having it. And that's good, So I think that's tremendously exciting for sports, for activism. I'll also just say, in terms of driving interest and passion for basketball, like I will see in social media in a day. I don't have time to sit down and watch Sports Center. Like, I'm a busy person, but like I will catch easy like 10 clips of like women doing amazing thing on social media, and share it and build that passion, build that, like, did you see this? Did you see, like to just continue that enthusiasm for the game, and reach people that might not realize how exciting the game is right now. Social media cannot be, overstated in terms of its importance.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, not to be cliche about it, but it's been a game changer. And I think one of the places where we've also seen it, not just with women's basketball, but speaking to your sport, Becca, which is soccer, right? So part of the equal pay fight there was pushed and promoted and amplified by players getting on social media and connecting directly with fans and making their case. And I would just want to touch a little bit on equal pay and the impact that you think that has, and perhaps a through line, if there is one to draw, and I think there is, from Title IX to this outspokenness and this unwillingness of women's soccer players to just be grateful for what they have, but to demand more.
For sure. And I think Tracy gave a great example of her players self-advocating, right? Like we didn't really, when I played at Brown, there wasn't a ton of self-advocacy happening for us. We sort of felt like what we got was what we got, and we should be sort of grateful for what we got. But I think there's now the shift in mindset, particularly having seen the U.S. women's national team, fight for so many rights and win, that a lot of women and women athletes are sort of saying, I feel like now I can speak my mind, and I am going to leverage my platform. The only sort of thing in the back of my head that makes me sort of wonder is like, maybe if they weren't such a winning team, like they might not have got this. And that is really heartbreaking to me, that because they're, 4 Olympic gold medals, 4 World Cup championships, like they are incredible. And to me, that was part of the why there. And that's sad, right? Like they shouldn't have had that many wins and accolades under their belt to win that. And so that to me is one thing that I'm always like, but certainly we can see it play out positively with current female athletes, sort of the way that women and student athletes are leveraging social media and other platforms to really be transparent about inequities and making sure that they are getting equal access and equal resources.
Mm-hmm. And also we now have name, image, and likeness in the mix. And I think that's a really interesting added dimension, because you can see sort of in hard numbers the value that companies and sponsors are placing on women athletes. And there's a comment, it's just here from the audience, I'll just read it. There's a recognition that media marketing has a huge impact, on name, image, and likeness. So the opportunities through name, image, and likeness come about as a result of media and marketing. Tracy, it seemed like you might want to say something on the topic of name, image, because you're dealing with that transition with your players.
Sure, I can comment on that. So we don't see it as much in the Ivy League, I would say. So more so at the Power 5 conferences, see that probably a little bit more there. However, we do have a few students who have taken advantage of it. And I think it's powerful because it does level the playing field in some way. And at some of the extreme situations, you could totally see how some folks didn't get the benefit off the usage of their name and likeness, so forth. So we'll see how it plays out. I think it's still early, and how certain folks get affected, and people understanding how to manage their money when they do make it and pay taxes and things like that. But from an Ivy League perspective, I'm not so sure we're as affected as some of the other schools.
Yeah. So staying on money matters, so to speak. I think it's pretty fair to say that there's not enough investment in girls and women's sports in a lot of areas. And you can see that with media rights deals. You can see that with a lack of money for marketing, a lack of money for purpose-built stadiums for women's teams, and a lot of different areas. So I'm curious, where should we be investing when it comes to women's sports on the college level, but also on the professional level? So I'll start with Becca on this, and then maybe head to Melissa, who might have some thoughts, and Tracy as well, if you have some thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. And in fact, I just saw the stat earlier today regarding NCAA's investment in travel equipment and recruitment, and women get 71 cents to the dollar for every guy. And so that needs to change, obviously. And again, that was around travel equipment and recruiting at the collegiate level. And so I think those 3 buckets, I mean, you'll see that play out in obviously where teams are staying, the type of hotel they're staying at, what they get on the road. I mean, when I was playing pro, we got like $8 per diem for lunch, right? And like, you know, we were 4 to a room. And, you know, having played pro in 2003 here in Boston, and then shortly thereafter working at the Boston Celtics in 2005, you know, it was, my mind literally exploded seeing all the things that the pro male athletes were getting in the NBA, having just been a professional athlete myself and having to live at home because I couldn't afford an apartment myself. I had to work on the side as a coach to make sure I had additional income coming in to cover my student loans, right? So, and then going to the Celtics and seeing that they have 75 types of different coaches, right? Sleep coaches, masseuse, like all the things. They had sleep chambers. They had all these crazy resources that just literally make your mind blow up. Because, and listen, I was so grateful for my opportunity to play pro, but there was such a disparity in the investment at the pro level that I'd honestly begin anywhere and you'll make an improvement comparative to male professional sports.
I don't want to put you on the spot. You say begin anywhere, but if there was one thing you took away from your time as a pro athlete, you know, where you just said, this is a bottom line thing. I mean, I've talked to female pro athletes who are working jobs, you know,
salary, start anywhere, salary. It's that baseline, pay us more money, baseline. It's just the salary. Yeah, that would be my first place to start.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts on where you would like to see investment, Tracy, at the college level, you know, and I'm not talking about, but just in general, don't want to call out Harvard in any way, but just in general, where would you like to see investment in women's sports across the NCAA landscape? Where do you think college women's sports can benefit from more investment?
Sure. I think just general funding for programs needs to go up. But what's interesting though, Shira, I heard Billie Jean King the other day mention, and she's talking about, you know, the equal pay now for women's soccer, women's pro soccer. And she was saying, this is wonderful. I'm so excited, but wait a minute, is all the funding going here? What about the funding that's going to the grassroots programming? Mm-hmm. And I said to myself, I'm like, bingo, right? And one of those reasons I'm saying bingo to myself is because of pay to play, right? So sports are getting at a youth level, are getting more and more and more and more expensive, right? Even when I played, you know, as a junior player years ago, it was so expensive, you know, to get to a tournament, train for the tournament, right? Break your racket strings, right? You have to pay for the coach, blah, blah, blah. So I can imagine what it is now, right? And when I go to the tournament, I saw very few people who look like me, sometimes for days, right? Maybe they were working there at the tournament. And there's a reason, right? Again, for access, money matters, things like that. So if we can figure out that part, I think put more money into grassroots programming, maybe have more institutions take more chances on creating creative programming that makes sense, that gets kids from the community involved, coming on campus, getting exposure to university. I think that's going to be a big thing. So yes, funding at the programmatic level inside the university with the schools and even scholarship schools and things like that, but really figure out how we can expand the boundaries of the university and how many people we can actually reach.
Becca, I think she's speaking to you because, I see your hand, MJ. But Becca, I just want to touch on the work you do with the Red Sox Foundation and your baseball and softball programs, because that's all about closing the opportunity gap, right? And it's exactly.
Yeah, we are hyper focused, and again, it is on baseball and softball, but we're hyper focused on free access to participation, predominantly in communities of color. And so we provide over 2,000 young people in Boston, ages 5 to 18, with free access to year-round baseball and softball. It's really focused in the summertime with the league, but we do year-round clinics. And again, with the notion being that you have to have an opportunity and pathway in to participate. And so that is at the heart of what we're focused on doing. My only wish is that we're able to do it with other sports. The way that we do that, though, is funding other sports organizations that are doing the same work with other sports in other cities. And so, yeah, that's sort of how we're doing that.
Melissa.
It's got to be a lot easier to find and watch women's sports. gotta work too hard to find that game when you turn on your TV. Like, why is that? You know, I think about the women's basketball NCAA tournament and these buzzer beaters. I mean, I defy anyone with a pulse to not be like on their seat, excited to watch. But if you can't find it, you're not going to build audience. You're not. It becomes this chicken the egg with marketing dollars. So you have to invest in telling the stories and showing the great moments. They are there. They are there. Create access to that. So everyone can see it and celebrate it and start to really build exponentially in terms of the dollars.
As part of it also, I'm curious, just the value that broadcasters are placing on women's sport or not, because they group those women's NCAA championships together, and I think they pay, ESPN pays something like for 24 women's championship sports, and I apologize for getting maybe it's a rough estimate, but something like 500 million, when there was the Kaplan report said something like the women's basketball tournament alone, the media rights there should be $100 million. And so
exactly.
Is that part of the systemic issue here, that we're not just valuing?
Yeah, not valuing the asset that, like look at the numbers, look at the sort of business opportunity that women's sports represent. Women's sports are not a charity case. Like they are worthy, they are valuable, and we just need to invest in a wise way and let all boats rise. And I think it was Becca that talked about equity and pay equity. I couldn't agree more with that. That's such a huge issue for players, but also coaches on the collegiate level, players in, I think about the pay issues in the WNBA, and what I think should be the biggest story in sports right now, which is Brittany Griner. And why is she in Russia to begin with? Well, in case you don't know, it's because in order to maximize her talent and maximize her ability to make a living in the very short time frame that any professional athlete has, she had to go overseas. She had to go overseas to Russia, which is a violent, homophobic country, to get paid over about $1 million a year versus $227,000 a year in America. What is up with that? So, I mean, I have a lot to say about Brittany, but specifically wanted to introduce the topic in terms of follow the money and where these players are having to go to feel valued.
If there's anyone else who wants to chime in on Brittany Griner or pay equity, and how that's sort of like, opportunity is one thing, but the ability to pay women athletes what they're worth is something, that needs to be tackled, and maybe is not under the purview of Title IX, but still something that needs addressing if women's sports is going to advance. Because I think that's what we're talking about now, in part, when we have a conversation about Title IX, it's how do we advance women's sports?
And I think we have to check our, sorry.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Sorry. I think we have to check our own biases too, right? I mean, I could be on a plane wearing the exact same thing as, let's say I have a male assistant coach and they think he's the coach for a lot of different reasons, right? But it's all the time, right? No matter what we're wearing, how old I look, how many years ago it was versus now. And why is that, right? We need more women coaches at the younger ages, right? At the youth level, so people get used to us, so they can think that way, think that we belong, as MJ said earlier. So I think that's a big part of it. The whole bias situation that's going on that sort of creates this whole institutional situation.
Yeah, I was only going to add that, Tracy, for me, when I was at the Celtics, every time I went somewhere, people thought I was the dancing team, part of the dancing team showing up. And I was like, actually, I'm running this event. So if I could talk to your boss, that would be great. Yeah, every single time, which today I take as a compliment, I think. But no, it's true. I mean, listen, the representation, we all know, matters. And we have got to find structures and ways to get more women into positions of power and influence, to continue to create, positive visual opportunities, which we know resonate, and become sort of these dreams and goals for younger girls. I did want to add something that we talked about a few topics ago, which was this idea of an academy system. And I can only speak to soccer. I'm not sure about tennis or basketball, but If you think about soccer or football, American soccer, football overseas, every country has an academy system. These academy systems are built to not only make pipelines for the ability to play pro, but they provide education, they provide income. We don't have that here. And that's a huge gap when you think about providing sort of structure and opportunity, particularly for young girls, to have pipelines into these opportunities to be pro, particularly young girls of color. And so I am very happy to see that we are finally starting to build academy systems within some of our clubs, particularly here in the Northeast, to make sure that young people and young people of color can get into these programs and make sure that they're sort of in the system to be identified as candidates for higher level play.
Mm-hmm. And MJ, I know you had something you wanted to chime in about earlier as well.
Oh, I think we move on to a new topic. So if it comes back, that's no problem.
Okay, well, I'm going to go to some audience questions. And this is one we had on our list to get to, but we'll get to it now. It says, at the risk of bringing politics into this subject, I want to ask what you all thought of the comments in the White House about protecting the ability of trans athletes to participate in women's sports under Title IX. And I'll turn to you, Melissa, because you have some of your films have addressed, have featured the trans community. So what are your thoughts there?
This is a big topic that deserves its own panel. You know, we're not going to even get close to the depth that the topic deserves right now in a few minutes, but I was fortunate to be able to direct a film about trans youth in Los Angeles. And I learned so much in a short time about this community. And what I have a hard time with is the fear that's leading the conversation, and the demonization of an incredibly vulnerable group of people. I mean, like 40% of trans youth attempt suicide. Like, really think about that. And that's because we talk about a sense of belonging. They don't feel like they belong. And sports is that. I think that is such an inherent role of sports. You know, in 2021, legislators from 20 different states proposed bans on trans athletes in publicly funded high schools, even though those legislators could hardly point to case studies where there was a problem to solve. So this climate of panic and fear and scarcity about what a trans athlete's going to mean for you, and immediately a position of feeling threatened, I would really just say, please take a breath. Please see the human beings. I watched a great documentary called Changing the Game about young trans athletes. I think it's on Hulu. Check it out. And don't let yourself be batted around by some of these players, particularly on the right, that are trying to manipulate your fear into thinking that there's this problem or assault on women's athletics when there's not. And remember the role of sports, and that Title IX is about protecting everybody. You know, that's really what it's about. That sports are important for everybody. And how can we come to solutions from that perspective?
To say, one of the things that you mentioned really caught my ear, which was this notion of scarcity, right? And I'm curious what everybody on the panel thinks about the way in which we think about women's sports. It seems like we are always operating from this sense of scarcity. There aren't enough scholarships. There isn't enough money or funding or marketing resources. And how do we change that mentality, you know, to say, well, the problem isn't, you know, a trans athlete taking opportunity away. The problem is that we all need to have more funding, that we all, you know, need more investment in the marketing apparatus, or, you know, in pushing editors to have more coverage of women's sports. Do you have any ideas, you know, because Title IX can flip the switch in some ways in terms of our mentality, but how you might flip the switch culturally and change the mindset and the culture, because it seems like we need culture change as well to kind of push women's sports forward and for the next 50 years. I see some thinking going on. So Becca, thoughts on what we can,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this whole idea of like fear and scarcity can be applied to so many other social issues that are national sort of conversations right now, not the least of which are gun rights, immigration. Like, it's all coming from a place of fear and thinking like something's going to get taken away from me and I deserve this. And so like, that's why I was thinking, because it's such a complex issue that is sort of at the forefront of our national rhetoric right now. And honestly, I don't know how to solve it. I think we need leaders to be brave and be courageous and be bold with decision making. We need people that are living these existences in the right places of power and influence to make change. Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on and on, so I'll stop there because, like I said, I think it is a very complex issue.
Oh, sorry, I see you. Yeah, MJ.
I was going to say, look, it has been a tremendously fearful time in our country for 2 or 3 years. Like, there's been a lot going on. People are so hyped up. They're isolated. We've been isolated. COVID, I would say first and foremost, get really local, your school, your place of work, your home, and connect with actual people. Don't hide behind the screens, connect to people, interact, listen, like, be a human. If you are feeling afraid, I think the human tendency is to like, I'm going to separate, I'm going to isolate, but only listen to what I want to, and then I'll be safe. And I actually think that the opposite is true. Like, just try to build a self-awareness about like, what is going on in my nervous system right now? And how can I counteract that with actual real life connection? How could I could go to this local game, women's soccer game. I could support this youth coach. You know what? I could watch Changing the Game. There's a great book, Kelsey Everett, who I think is on this call, called The Keeper, all about, Title IX, the history of it, and her experiences in soccer. Like, I could buy that, but I could do something in my life, my own life. It's not, creating change isn't about, hitting consecutive home runs. It's about like showing up to practice every day and doing little things right, little things right together. That's how you can start to dismantle this culture of fear that we're living in right now. Even today, even trying to connect with, with some like-minded folks and cheer one another today, like it matters. All of it matters.
So I think we have time for a couple more questions. I want to just, because one of the things that struck me with what Becca was saying was this notion of, bold and courageous leaders. And it just brings to mind tennis, because you've had a long history of bold and courageous leaders. You've mentioned Billie Jean King. We talked about Arthur Ashe previously, but when it comes to women, all the way up now to Naomi Osaka and Serena Williams in many ways. And I'm just curious what you think it is about the culture of tennis that promotes that or encourages a certain outspoken activism and individuality. Maybe it's because it's largely an individual sport.
There you go. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's, largely individual, right? You're thinking all the time. You're all alone out there, right? It's just you. You can't blame it on anybody else. You can say, oh, you didn't pass me the ball. No, you're the only one hitting the ball right now, right? So I think that spurs a lot of thought. You can definitely feel when you're not included in tennis, right? You can definitely feel when you walk into a space that you're the only person there, of a certain, gender or a certain race, whatever. So it can be quite lonely, a sport like tennis. So different feelings are highlighted right away in tennis, with country clubs and things of that nature. One of the things that I'm very proud of, going along with the tennis tradition that you just mentioned, a couple of our players helped institute the Harvard Black Varsity Association. So during the pandemic, around that George Floyd time, they got together and we tried to get my help, and we got our athletic director to help us form, this group. And it really was about a safe place and a safe space. It still isn't a very, very inclusive group, and that was the premise, and it still is. So other groups have come about, for Asians and all types of charges. So real excited about that. So I don't know what it's about tennis. We just got it in us. I don't know, Shira.
And then just real quickly, sort of peering into your crystal balls, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary today of Title IX. What would you like to see over the next 50 years? I know that's a big time period, but what do you hope, where do you hope to see long-term investment or big strides made when it comes to equality of opportunity, equality of experience, equality of investment? What would you like to see? What would be a victory, so to speak, over the next 50 years? And we'll start with Melissa. And then we'll go to Tracy and finish up with Becca.
Well, when you say that, sure, like a movie plays in my head 50 years from now. So it's like, 2072, and there's like futuristic library above Lamont, and it's like a spaceship library. And there's some Harvard undergrad going up there to get the archive of this recording today, right? In the dusty corners somewhere, and to replay this conversation and have it feel so arcane and so outdated and so ancient, because all these issues we talked about, particularly around equity and opportunity and diversity, have been solved. Like, to be like, wow, can you believe what this is like from another planet, 50 years from now. That's just how my brain works. And that gives me a smile. That would be great. If they think we're just super old and ancient when they look back on this.
Tracy.
Yeah, so I think we've come, so far, as women. I just hope we keep going. We definitely need the help of men. And I see, at all levels, a lot of plans being made, really, really cool, thoughtful plans. And I really hope they get carried out, basically. And people get involved in learning. It has to be about another culture or another race, or get involved in local organizations, national organizations. I'm involved with the Black Women in Sport Foundation. So just, educating yourselves on issues is super critical, about women. If you don't understand women, about folks of color, about people from different socioeconomic levels, LGBTQ plus, category, everything. So I'm excited for the futures. I think we're moving in a good direction, but a lot of work to do.
And Becca.
Yeah, I think for me, where I want to be in 50 years is there to be no differences between urban education and suburban education, and what opportunities and resources are provided to our most underserviced populations when we think about urban areas and communities of color. I want them to be afforded the same access and resources and participation rights to education and physical activity and sport as suburban communities.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thank you all very much for your thoughts, for your insights, for your perspective, for sharing your experiences. This concludes our program. It was a terrific conversation, and the audience provided excellent questions. Today's program has been recorded and will be posted on the Radcliffe website in about a week. For information on upcoming Radcliffe virtual programs, to explore collections at Radcliffe Schlesinger Library related to Title IX and to gender in sports, or to see videos of past events, please visit www.radcliffe.harvard.edu. And thank you everyone again for joining us today, and take care.